if you're thinking that our foreign policy seems disjointed, fragmented, schizophrenic, that's because it kind of is, but it's not. I mean, it looks schizophrenic and fragmented, but there's really something else driving it. Okay, let's compare our policy in the United States, Russia's policy, and Western policy in Europe writ large. Russia is actually the most coherent on the surface. They're going to just keep going because they still keep saying they're winning, even though objectively they've lost 1 million casualties and have not been making much ground. They're just going to keep going. It's almost like they're denying what's actually happened and just going to keep going. That's perhaps more coherent than Western and American policies, which seem really schizophrenic. And when I say it seems really schizophrenic, it's like things like this. We see that the first load of U.S. supplied, NATO funded, now it's not U.S. Arms given to Ukraine, but it's U.S. supplied, though NATO funded it, right? It's NATO purchased. These arms and equipment have arrived in Ukraine under the Pearl program, per Ukraine's national broadcaster, Suspilny. Per NATO representative, more packages are on the way. They bought $1 billion worth of stuff, and more is going to keep coming. Okay, so they're going to keep doing that. While that's happening, the Trump administration has given the green light for a substantial military sale to Poland, approving a deal for Javelin missile systems worth $780 million. The last thing I'm going to talk about is what Trump just said about Poland. So we'll wait till the very end, and you'll see how weirdly this kind of doesn't seem to fit, but it kind of does when you think about it. Okay. Lawmakers then also sounded alarm over Trump administration decision to end European security programs. 14 senators signed a letter to Rubio and Hegseth warning that ending the Baltic Security Initiative and other aid programs would embolden adversaries like Russia and China. But why are we selling them this stuff and emboldening them at the same time? Well, part of that is because it's not our problem. We want to get out of there. We want to extricate ourselves so that we can focus on China. Or is that even really the thing? We'll talk about that too. Okay, Ukraine and Poland are establishing a joint task force for unmanned aerial systems. I talked about that briefly yesterday. Greg Terry really hammered this point, right? And Ukraine and Poland are establishing this joint task force for unmanned aerial systems. Corresponding memorandum was signed today in Kyiv, that's yesterday, with Poland's deputy prime minister. Now, they're going to start working on joint production. They're going to start, like, Poland figured out that what Ukraine has is what it needs, and they were resting too much on their laurels. It's kind of like I ran track when I was in high school. I could easily run a sub-minute quarter, right? I mean, 5 and change for a mile, but a sub-minute for a quarter mile, which is pretty good. I mean, it's reasonably good. I couldn't do that now if I wanted to, but I still kind of look in the mirror and think that I'm that guy that 30 years ago could do this thing. That's where Poland was. That's where NATO was. NATO's been resting on its laurels, thinking it could do stuff that maybe it can't really do. And it gets worse. The EU is preparing talks on a drone wall along its eastern front, a response to Russia's drone strikes that already reached Poland this month. Okay, that's great. They're thinking through this. They're trying to get this, but they still think they're a lot stronger than they actually are. Next week, the EU will begin talks on building this drone wall along its eastern border to defend against Russian threats. Ukraine is expecting to join. We are the only country in Europe fighting a modern war against Russia. Warfare has changed, absolutely 100%, and not everybody's gotten the message. AI-powered drones are now essential. That's right, AI is going to be big. Fiber optic, the word I couldn't remember yesterday when I stumbled over, the lines on the drones. Okay, was having one of those moments. I'm tired, folks. AI-powered drones and fiber optics, and armies must adapt. Okay. So all that's happening, and yet our policy is still incoherent. We're not just Orban still is just his fealty to Putin seems to have no end. This is from the Swedish Prime Minister. Dear Victor, Swedish Prime Minister publishes an open letter to Orban that it is already being called quotable. Ulf Christensen recalled in 1956 when Soviet tanks crushed Hungary's freedom and Sweden sheltered its dissidents. That's why we question when you go to have coffee with a leader of the same country that crushed your compatriots' freedom struggle in 1956 and that today attacks your neighbor, Ukraine. Like, what are you doing? Like, it's like, it's a bad idea. It's like it's a bad idea to have a pet alligator. This isn't a good thing. It's not going to work out well, right? Don't do that. It's just all bad. Now, again, when I said it gets worse, this is Andrei Ilarinov's his assessment of the Russian drone attacks on Poland. NATO is dead. Dramatic pause there, intentionally. NATO is dead. The U.S. denied Article 5 for Poland. He warned in January that Putin's goal in negotiations with Trump is to kill NATO so that he can invade Europe, stripped of its U.S. security umbrella. So as far as the Russians go, the Russians want to do a couple things. They are testing Poland to see what, how far can we go. They're also trying to back off the Europeans. You see what happened here with Europe buying these drones and thinking like Europe's trying to buy these things now themselves. That's not the same as arming Ukraine at the same rate as what it was going to be. That's what Jason J. Smart's theory was. And so that's having that effect. But if NATO doesn't respond in some kind of meaningful way, then NATO really is a paper tiger. And that's what Putin's trying to prove. And so Putin becomes emboldened by this sort of thing because of our disjointed, we're going to do something to you, but don't do something to us because, and if you do something, we don't do anything. Okay. So Putin, there's a reason that Putin believes he's going to win this war of attrition. Yesterday, Putin said that more than 700,000 Russian soldiers are on the front line. Gerasimov reported an offensive along the entire front line. Experts at the Institute for the Study of War believe that such messages signal that the Kremlin is counting on dragging out the war by using its numerical advantage. And frankly, they do have a numerical advantage. Let's not kid ourselves. Okay, according to analysts, Putin sincerely believes that Russia can outlast Western support for Ukraine and eventually exhaust the Ukrainian armed forces, depriving them of the strength to resist. So Europe is disjointed, and some Europeans want to strengthen Ukraine, and other Europeans their strategy is looking to, after the war, what kind of deals they can make with Russia. And I'm not just talking about Orban either, or Fico. And they're looking toward, after the war, how they can make the deals, the sweet Russian deals, to make money. And so they're disjointed. They don't want to go all in because going all in means you're maybe cutting some of that off. And so their strategy here, and it looks schizophrenic, but it's really not, because if that's your strategy, then it makes sense why you're doing what you're doing. Okay. Russians are all in. Russians have published a textbook on operating drones for 8th and 9th grade school students titled Unmanned Aerial Vehicles 8th and 9th grades. They have also published a textbook on the use of drones for bachelor's, master's, and specialist programs in universities. Anyone still believes they're preparing for peace talks, or that things are coming down the line? They're coming down the line. Not tomorrow, but they're coming down the line. Russian State Duma Deputy Mikhail Matveev is proposing a 1% levy on bar and restaurant bills to support the families of Russian soldiers, calling it both material and moral. It's a clear sign that Kremlin is feeling the financial strain of the war, turning to ordinary Russians as reserves dwindle. But they're still trying to continue the war, not stop the war. That's the point here. The chairman of the supervisory board of the Moscow Exchange, Sergei Shevtsov, said that Russia will have to live with a military budget for another 5 to 8 years. 5 to 8 years. This is not going away anytime soon. According to him, even after the war ends, Russia will replenish its stockpiles and rearms. Again, there's no plans for peace there. Putin has talked about this before. Combat veterans will be our successors. People who fear nothing in serving the motherland and who have taken risks with their health and lives should be promoted to leadership positions, right? They're trying to encourage this kind of martial spirit. And on top of that, they're going back and doubling down on the authoritarianness. This is from RT. Putin discusses the idea of renaming Volgograd back to Stalingrad, saying it would be unfair to ignore the role he played in our victory in the Great Patriotic War. but added that Stalin's wartime leadership must also be weighed against his role in political repressions, but he's still wanting to do this, to rename it Stalingrad. In fact, of the statues to Stalin in Russia, and this is an old statistic going back almost a year, out of 110, 90 were erected since Putin came into office. Think about that. This is in the former Soviet Union. Even the chairman of the Russian Federation State Duma, Volodin, believes that Russian officials need to stop vacationing abroad. But the European Union isn't trying to stop it, because the European Union has what looks like a schizophrenic policy, but it's really a policy meant to outlast the war so that they can make the deals with Russia again. The head of Russian foreign ministry is furious with Europe. Okay, I've been talking about Lavrov for the last couple of days. I'm pointing this out with Lavrov because he's doing the exact opposite of what I try to do. He says EU leaders don't want peace in Ukraine. Okay, what I try to do is tell you, don't try to understand or impugn motives, but look at what actually factually happened. EU leaders don't want peace in Ukraine. This is all motives. They want revenge for World War II. And if you say that, what you're saying, revenge for World War II, well, wait a minute, the British and the French, they were on your side. No, but he's talking about Germans. The Germans are Nazis. The Ukrainians are Nazis. He's all tying it all together. But he's impugning the motives along the way, which I find fascinating. And that's a strategic move on his part. In my estimation, I could be wrong. That's just commentary, but he knows better than to do this kind of thing unless he's doing it with intent, because he's a very smart guy, even if I don't like him. Earlier, he also claimed that Europe has no place at the negotiating table. He's trying to subvert that kind of thing happening when they get to negotiations as well. Talking about the Bucha hoax, it was all staged. Lavrov says, I think this is a disgrace for the UN Secretary General. I've been asking him one question for the third year in a row. I ask you to use your authority, Mr. Secretary General, to get a list of those people whose corpses were shown in the city of Bucha on a central street. Okay, so he's making it, he's challenging this in order to show, see, it was a hoax. There's nothing to see here. Even if he gets it, he'll say he didn't get it. Okay, let's talk about more of our incoherent policy. So remember in Alaska, remember when Trump meets with Putin in Alaska and they have this chummy time? Well, one of the things that they talk about apparently was to make sweet oil deals in the Arctic. Maybe we'll bring ExxonMobil back. Well, Exxon wants no part of that. ExxonMobil has no plans to return to Russia's Arctic oil project, despite negotiations over $4.6 billion in expropriated assets. Like when they left, they took a huge hit financially because, well, Russia wasn't going to just give it away. They were going to take it. The company exited Sakhalin-1 project in 2022 after the start of Russia's war, and Moscow forcibly transferred Exxon's stake. So Exxon's not signing up for that again. With a new focus on the Western Hemisphere and Asia Pacific, the Trump administration faces questions over the future health assistance for countries such as Ukraine. Remember, things have been shut down like USAID and other things along those lines. And it seemed coherent, like, oh, okay, well, we can't do this because we need to focus on China, but we're not really focusing on China. Tough on China, I was told. Deterrence by Denial, the book that the policy writer who is focused on China, the undersecretary, was called a State of Denial, right? We're denying China to be hegemonic in that region. Tough on China, deterrence by denial, they said. Well, Trump's administration declined to approve $400 million in military aid to Taiwan, negotiated a trade deal because they're trying to negotiate a trade deal and potential summit with Chinese leader Xi. So Trump's not trying to be tough on China. He's trying to make a deal with China. And so, wait a minute, but if we're not doing China, and there's a recent report that we're pivoting away from looking at China to just looking at our own hemisphere. So that leads us to what's going on with Venezuela. And my last video, I was talking with Preston Stewart about why we're blowing up Venezuelan ships and sending a bunch of U.S. Navy down there. And you want to check that out as well. So one of the reasons, now this just goes to the incoherence. We get out of Iraq, but now we want the Bagram Air Base back. Remember the Bagram Air Base? This was a site of some pretty bad ending in Iraq. In Afghanistan. One of the reasons that we want Bagram base is that, as you know, it's an hour away from where China makes its nuclear weapons. So a lot of things are happening, the U.S. president said. So we wanted out of it because we didn't want to support it, but we also left it, and now we're worse off than where we were before. And this is a microcosm for our entire policy. President Trump being interviewed, but if Europe did something with respect to China, I think China would probably maybe force an end to the war. So Trump's trying not to actually force the end of the war, but put the burden on Europe to do it. Europe doesn't want to do it because they're looking forward to sweet relations with Russia on the backside. Not all of Europe, I understand. Don't put hate mail in the comments, but you understand what I'm saying? Europe doesn't want to do it. We don't want to do it. And so in the meantime, Ukrainians languish. And here he is again. Trump refuses to say if Russian drones in Poland were a mistake. Quote, I can't comment on whether it was a mistake or not, but let's face it, they shouldn't have been there, which is a little bit aground, but not really what it ought to be. The U.S. president admitted, leaving the question wide open. So they shouldn't have been there, but I don't know if it was a mistake. But I'm not going to actually do something. And I'm denying Article 5. We're going to talk in Article 4, but we're not going to go anywhere further than that. So is NATO dead? Possibly. Is this intentional? Possibly. Okay. The only thing that we do know for sure is this. Russia's Far East Battalion of Petropavlovsk Kamachki was just rocked by a massive magnitude 7.8 earthquake, the third in the last month, with tsunami warnings already going out. The city hosts the Russians' Navy submarine base and the Air Force's air base. That's the only thing that we can say for certain. Everything else is like, it looks like they're doing this and then they're doing that, and this doesn't add up. And why doesn't it add up? Well, sometimes it doesn't add up because they don't want it to add up. I'm afraid that's kind of where we are. Tell me what you think about what you saw here. I mean, maybe you can connect dots that I haven't connected in some way. Put that in the comments below. Thank you, my friends, for your time. I want to give a shout out here. And this shout out goes to Papa Rob Menasco. He's an undergraduate, a YouTube member, and Papa Rob, thank you very much for your support. Thank you to all of you for your support. Thank you for the time, the likes, the shares, and the subscribes, and for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.